Okay, looks like we've got a good number of people here. So I'm just gonna give a few opening remarks. I'd like to welcome everyone to our 2022 homecoming. Very excited to have you here. If you live in the area, we're hoping we'll see you at some of our events tomorrow and Saturday, especially we've got tomorrow night, the Cowboy Lounge. And if you live far away from Las Vegas, you can't make it here, we're glad you can at least join us on Zoom for these wonderful talks we're having. I'm going to get started here with our HU talk shortly. We'll have you all muted as soon as we begin, except Dr. Arshad. And we'll unmute everyone or unmute people for the Q&A. We ask that you please stay muted during the talk to prevent any background noise from interrupting. And this session will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later. We'll be posting all of these. So if you miss anything or you want to go back and watch it again, it will be there. We also want to extend our thanks to the student sign language interpreters and to their coordinator, Carol Litherland, for providing this wonderful service today. Now with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ali Arshad. He is here to give an HU talk titled, "Did You Hear the Music Stop? Where is the US economy headed?" And with that, I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Renee. Let me enlarge this first. Okay. Well, if you were there at the last two presentations, I must confess that a very hard act to follow, from Kant's deontology to Michael Corleone and Plato's cave, but I'll try to keep you interested in the US economy. So my topic is, did you hear the music stop? Where is the US economy headed? Well, the short answer is no. The music hasn't stopped, but it has become fainter. And some of the musician friends of mine would say that it has become a movement in andante tempo, which is a moderately slow tempo. So the economy has slowed down a little, not that much. So let me talk about what's going on with the current economic situation. Now, in order to understand what's happening now, we need to look at what was happening to the economy just recently during the pandemic, because what is happening now is affected very much by the pandemic. So I'm going to focus first on the first 2 years of the US economy during COVID-19. So 2020 to the beginning of 2021. So the whole of 2020, the whole of 2021, and then the changes start to manifest in 2022. Now, in order to understand the economy, we need to pay attention to four things. The first is what is happening to the real gross domestic product, the GDP. Now, many of you already know what GDP is. It's the final value of all goods and services that are produced in the US economy during a particular time. Well, in any economy, but we are focusing on the US economy. So everything that is on the shelf throughout the US markets, they are part of the GDP. The second thing that we need to pay attention to is the unemployment rate. How many people are unemployed? How many people are how many people are employed will tell a little bit about what is happening to the economy, but how many people are unemployed, what is the rate of unemployment, will tell us a little bit more. The third thing is the inflation rate. And as you know, inflation rate affects all of us. And I'm going to talk about all these things in just a few minutes. And finally, the interest rate. What is happening to the interest rate? Now, the body that controls the interest rate is the central bank, the Federal Reserve System. So we'll talk about all of these things and what is happening to all these variables. So first of all, the real GDP. So I'm first going to talk about just the 2 years, and then what's happening in this particular year. So if you look at the during COVID, well, this chart starts with the fourth quarter of 2020. Notice that despite the fact that the markets were completely shut, uh, many businesses were not producing anything, not selling anything, the GDP was increasing. And look at what happened in the second quarter of 2021 and the fourth quarter of 2021. We almost reached 7% growth in the GDP. Why did it happen? Well, I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But that's what was going on during the pandemic. And again, I'll talk about the current situation this year's, the first 2 quarters of this year's GDP a little bit later on. And then if you look at the civilian unemployment rate, now this goes back. I couldn't find a chart just for the first 4 years, but it'll give us a pretty good idea of what was going on at the beginning of the pandemic. Notice that the unemployment rate was around 3.5% in February of 2020. And that is regarded as full employment. Economists would say, most economists would agree that if the unemployment rate is 5% or less, you pretty much have full employment, because you'll always have some people who are between jobs. You always have some people who are affected by the structural changes in the economy. So you'll always have some unemployment, and people who are voluntarily out of the market looking for a job, that's no fault of the economy. So that's regarded as full employment. But then look at what happened in April of 2020. That was the height of the pandemic. That is when the businesses began to shut down. We had a complete shutdown of the economy, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And the unemployment rate in the United States went up to 14.7%. That was the time when economists were sounding the alarm bells. They were telling that we need to do something in order to mitigate the situation. Otherwise, we will be facing a situation very similar to what happened in the 1930s. And some of you who have read the history know that that was the Great Depression. And that lasted for almost a decade. So we didn't want that to happen. And if you notice that the unemployment rate began to very quickly come down because of what the government did. And again, I'll talk about what the government did in just a few minutes. The third thing that we need to look at is the inflation rate. What is happening to prices? Nobody was paying any attention to the inflation rate until this year. And you'll see that we had practically tamed inflation. The inflation rate was around 2.5% throughout the 2010s. And that was because the Federal Reserve Bank, the central bank, had targeted the inflation rate. That's what they try to target during normal times. But then what happened in after 2020, after the pandemic started, it began to climb up. And June 2022, I'm going to talk about that also, it reached the highest level since 1981. So we have quite a high inflation rate, although it is coming down. And if you look at some of the items, the inflation rate has been quite high for many of the products. So food, the inflation rate that is for 12-month ending August 2022 was 11.4%. And look at the inflation rate for energy services. 68.5%. And I'm sure all of you felt that when you went to fill up your car's tank. So inflation has been creeping up since 2022, early 2022, but before that, it was quite low. As far as the interest rate, again, the interest rate is also going to all of us, those of us who have borrowed money for mortgages, are going to borrow money for mortgages, those who have credit cards. So all of us would be affected. And again, notice that, again, I couldn't find a chart which was close enough, but I wanted to also show what happened in the 1980s. Some of you are young enough to know what happened in 1980s. The look at the inflation. I'm sorry, interest rate. That was 19.08%. That was the interest rate, the federal funds rate. Now we are right now. That's a far cry, and I hope we don't go back to that situation. But throughout the 2010s, the interest rates were close to 0%. As a matter of fact, if you looked at the interest rate after discounting for inflation, interest rates were negative. It was just like saying that the lenders were giving you money for borrowing their money. But then again, interest rates began to climb up, and that was, of course, because of the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, so the question is, despite the shutdown, why did the US economy grow during the pandemic, during COVID? Well, simple answer is because there was tremendous amount of relief provided by the two successive US governments. So first, we had in 2020 March, the CARES Act was passed. It was a $2 trillion stimulus package, and many of you probably benefited from the relief money that the government provided to not just to businesses, but also to U.S. households. Then the same year, President Donald Trump signed a 2.3 trillion Consolidated Appropriation Act. So you got your some more relief. And then when President Biden got elected, he passed another 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. And I didn't mention in here, we also had the Inflation Reduction Act, and I can talk more about that also in Q&A if you're interested. But that its effect hasn't been felt as yet. So oftentimes when I teach economics, and the funny thing about economics is that it becomes more interesting for students, especially for my adult students, when the economy is bad. So the first question that I get when I'm teaching macroeconomics is, what's the difference between a recession and depression? And the best answer I've come across is the one that was given by President Truman. And he said that a recession is when a neighbor loses his job, and a depression is when you lose your job. I like that definition. But of course, as an economist, I cannot use that, especially being if I'm a macroeconomist teaching what's going on in the U.S. economy. So a recession is defined, and this is the narrowest definition of recession. It is a 2 consecutive quarters drop in the real GDP, but it's not quite accurate. Many economists don't quite agree that that's the best way of looking at recession. What about inflation? And again, one of the best answers, there's another question that students ask. They haven't asked me for a long time. Back in the 1980s, when I was teaching economics, macroeconomics, That was the most popular question I would get. Well, you know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. When you have inflation, it's only worth 350 words. That's again an interesting quote that I found, and I always tell the students that's how to think about inflation. But in reality, inflation is simply rising prices. When prices are going up, it's not high prices, but rising prices or positive change in what economists call the consumer price index. Okay, now one other question that many people have been raising recently is stagflation. Are we heading towards stagflation? What exactly is stagflation? Well, stagflation is when the economy is stagnant and we also facing rising prices, when we have inflation coupled with stagflation. That happened again in the 1980s. Now, in order to understand the connection between inflation and unemployment, because economists usually, when they're talking about short-term economic problems, they focus on these two things: inflation, what's happening to inflation, what is happening to unemployment, or if we have both, like stagflation, why are we in a stagnant state with high inflation? In order to understand that, we need to look at a nice, neatly drawn curve that A.W. Phillips came up with. It was known as the Phillips curve. Uh, A.W. Phillips was a professor at the London School of Economics, and he published a paper, a seminal paper in the journal Economica in 1958, and he looked at the relationship, long-term relationship between wages. Actually, he looked at wage inflation, inflation caused by higher wages, and the unemployment rate for the UK's economy. And he looked at between 1861 and 1957. And he found that there was an inverse relationship between these two variables. And since then, the Phillips curve has become a standard in any macroeconomics textbook. If you want to think about short-term economic problems, you have to understand the Phillips curve, except that it fell out of favor when we were living in what economists call the Goldilocks economy, not too cold, not too hot. Now, this was a study done for the UK's economy. Another study was done by two Nobel laureates, Paul Samuelson and Robert Solow, and they looked at the US economy and to find out if the Phillips curve also was true for the US economy. But they studied a shorter period from 1935, which of course was the height of the Great Depression, until 1959, when we had come out of the Second World War and the European economies had started to rebuild. And they found that the inverse relationship was also true for the US economy. So economists continue to believe that a positive correlation exists between unemployment until things were turned upside down in the 1970s and 1980s, especially when we had a stagflation. So the Phillips curve became sort of instead of being a convex curve, it became a concave curve. During the period of 1970 to 2003, there were many years when the US economy suffered the effect of what came to be known as stagflation, high inflation and high unemployment. So people began to question the Phillips curve. Now, when COVID-19 hit the world economy, the same fears resurfaced. Economists began to talk about, well, what would happen when the economy reopens? We'll have, first of all, we'll be definitely going to have high unemployment, but there will be a pent-up demand that will push prices up. People are going to go back to restaurants. They'll go back to watching movies. They'll buy goods that they were deprived of. And so there'll be what economists call the demand pull inflation. So the fears resurface. As a matter of fact, just today, the World Bank issued the alarm bells regarding stagflation for the global economy. They believe that we will have some sort of stagflation. As a matter of fact, in the European Union, right now they have high inflation and they also have high unemployment rate. So some would say that, well, that probably is the beginning of stagflation, at least in the European Union. Now, let's look at what happened to all these things in the four factors that I talked about, and I'll come back to the GDP during the pandemic. So as I pointed out, in April of 2020, the unemployment rate was 14.7%, but there was a precipitous fall in the rate, and that was because of the fiscal stimulus provided by both the Trump administration as well as the Biden administration. Trillions of dollars of money were pumped in the economy, and that kept the economy afloat. If that had not happened, and you don't have to be a Keynesian to believe that, if that had not happened, probably we would have had a depression. And look at where we are now. In August 2022, the unemployment rate is 3.7%. It went up slightly from July to August, from 3.6% to 3.7%. And that's when people began to think about stagflation. Oh my God, you have rising unemployment and look at the inflation rate. So are we heading towards stagflation? So as economies around the globe began opening up in 2021, a sense of optimism took over. The planned opening of the markets and businesses made economists think that perhaps we'll go back to the pre-pandemic level. The economy will return very quickly to where we were at, the Goldilocks economy, unemployment around 3.56%, and an inflation rate around 2 to 2.5%, the best of all the worlds. Now, one thing that happened during COVID, and well, the COVID is not yet over. I shouldn't talk about as it being over, but when the economies began to open up, we had a bit of a labor shortage. The US economy grew throughout 2021, and in the fourth quarter, as I showed you, the GDP grew at a rate of 6.9%, but there were help signs everywhere. People were complaining about, well, we have a labor shortage, and they started to blame the federal government for providing the relief, which is preventing people from coming back to the workforce. People are lazy. They just wanted to get free money, and they don't want to work. When 2020 started, economists had similar expectations that the economy will bounce back, and everything would be good. But two things happened. One, we had supply chain bottlenecks, and then we had the war in Ukraine. And the war in Ukraine, nobody thought would last that long, and it would have such a disrupting effect. And we'll talk about some of those things. So again, coming back to what happened to the GDP, in the first quarter of this year, GDP fell by 1.57%. And then in the second quarter, which ended just recently, there was another fall, although a smaller fall in GDP. But going back to the definition that the National Bureau of Economic Research uses, technically we are in a recession. But if you talk to economists, they would say that Probably not. Why is that? Because this definition is perhaps the narrowest definition of GDP, of a recession. The two consecutive quarters decline in the real GDP. There has been only one time soon after the Second World War, in the second and third quarter of 1947, that we had negative growth in GDP for two quarters. But very few economists thought that we were in a recession. And the reason was because the job market was very strong, which is what is happening right now. We have a similar pattern in the current US economy. In the first 7 months of 2022, this year, the US economy added 3.3 million new non-farm jobs. That is 471,000 jobs per month, which kept the unemployment rate at 3.7% in August. Although the August figures revealed that in the month of August, only 315,000 jobs were added to the economy, and that led to decline in the stock market. Inflation has been on the rise. As I said, it hit the level not seen since the early 1980s. So where are we on the Phillips curve? Well, if you talk to most economists, they don't really talk about the Phillips curve anymore. Well, if you can imagine the Phillips curve that I showed you, it's downward sloping curve with inflation on the vertical axis and unemployment on the horizontal axis. Any economy will be at a certain point on a particular Phillips curve. It doesn't have to be exactly the one that was drawn for the U.S. economy in the 1950s, or the UK economy for the longer period. But any economy will be on some point on the Phillips curve. So here we have the unemployment rate, which is now hovering around above 8%, which is quite high. And inflation is low. So are we, down? Well, actually, are we in a stagflationary stage? That's a good question. Again, same thing. This is the inflation rate for different months. As you can see, for 2022, inflation has been rising steadily from January up until July. Actually, we did get the August figure. It was 8.3%. Just 2 days ago, we got the August figure. It was lower compared to July, but not as low as many economists thought, 8.3%. And the funny thing about the stock market is whenever your expectations are not met, it panics. So we had a 500 points drop in the stock market when the numbers came out on September 13th. So although inflation is the highest since 1981, it fell in July. Now, what about the shortage in the labor market? Well, first of all, there's always a shortage when the economy is doing well. There's always a lag in filling jobs. So you'll always have a natural shortage in the labor market. But if you look at the real wage rates have not really gone up that much. If there is a shortage, one of the things that will get evidence in the labor market would be rising wages. That hasn't really happened in real terms. Wages, money wages, or what economists call nominal wages, have been going up, but the real wages have stayed flat or actually have gone down. So we know that this inflation is not caused by the labor market. We also know that there are still severe bottlenecks in the supply chain, and we know the causes. They were caused initially by the global COVID lockdown, especially in China. We had port congestion, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. We had decreased air freight transportation due to COVID-19. And then we had the war in Ukraine. All of that contributed to the supply. And then, of course, the rail freight. One of the good news that came out was that there's a chance that the rail strike in the United States might be averted. So that is good news. Hope that doesn't happen. But this was the rail freight disruption due to uncertainty about passage to Russia, from China to Russia and to Europe. So all these resulted in severe shortages of parts for cars, semiconductors, silicone chips, baby formulas, female hygiene products. There was severe shortage in all these, but they were caused by initially the disruption, the closing down of the economy, and then even when the economy opened up, we had port congestion and freight problems and so forth. Well, we also know that the war in Ukraine has caused the energy prices to increase. So the economists are pretty confident what the source of inflation is. It is not because of demand factors, it's because of supply factors. What about the interest rates? What's happening to the interest rate? Well, again, as I showed you, this is the chart I showed you before. The interest rates were almost zero from 2010 to 2015, began to climb up a bit because inflation picked up. But then again, throughout the 2020s, it remained flat until this year. July 2022, the Fed raised the interest rate to 1.68%. And then in August, they had another raise. Next week, they're meeting again. And there's a good possibility that the interest rates will increase. And I think that by the end of the year, we'll have at least 2 more interest rate increases. It may go up to almost 3 to 3.25%, or maybe even more, depending on how aggressive the Federal Reserve wants to be. So where is the economy headed? That was, the other part of my question. Well, first of all, there's no recession signals from the labor market. There's no recession in the labor market because we have almost full employment. Job growth has been strong in the last several months, actually throughout, I would say, throughout the 2020s, 2022, this year. As I said, the last month's figures were a bit disappointing, but still 315,000 jobs added. That's not bad. Unemployment has been low. Inflation is high, but the aggressive interest rate hike by the Federal Reserve system has had some impact. Now, many of my fellow economists might disagree with that. I think that it has had some impact, especially in the housing market. The 30-year mortgage rates have gone up again. They are close to, I believe, 6%. The figures came out just today. In June, the inflation rate was 9.1%, but it fell to 8.5% in July, and then 8.3%. That's a hopeful sign. Now, what would happen to the long-term rate depends on the supply chain bottlenecks. And again, that is not caused by the supply chain. The supply chain bottlenecks will raise the interest rates, will raise the inflation rate. And then how the Fed reacts that will affect the long-term rates. Now, one good sign, another good sign is that energy prices are decreasing. If you have gone to the pump recently, you've seen that for the last 2 months, the prices have been going down. Now, here is the Global Supply Chain Pressure Index, which measures how much supply chain bottlenecks we have, and it's measured in terms of standard deviation. So if there is if the standard deviation is close to 0, it means that there's very little bottleneck. But again, notice what happened in December of last year. It went up. There was a severe shortage in December of 2021. But again, the good news is that supply shortages are getting better. So August 2022, it came down. But still, we still have severe bottlenecks. And again, this is the average gasoline prices since June. They have been falling consistently. June average, these are the averages in US cities, $4.93 per gallon. It's gone down to $3.97 per gallon. So what should we conclude about where the economy is heading? Well, first of all, there is no evidence. If you look at the job figures, there's no evidence that we are near stagflation. So I'll slightly disagree with the World Bank economists here that we don't have stagflation as yet. Now, things may change drastically depending on factors that we don't know anything about. But right now, there's no sign of stagflation. As I pointed out, this is a supply side inflation, also known as cost push inflation. It's caused by the bottlenecks in the supply chain. It's not a demand pull inflation. So the monetary policy that is aimed at tightening the supply of money by raising interest rate is probably not going to have much of an impact. I would argue that right now, the Federal Reserve Bank should think twice before increasing the interest rate. Inflation may remain high until the first quarter of 2023. And again, that also depends on any further COVID shutdown. And if the Federal Reserve reacts too strongly, the economy may plunge into a recession, and that may then cause stagflation. So the key thing here is the Fed should not overreact. As I said, 30-year mortgages have reached 6%, shouldn't kill the housing market. There's still a possibility of a mild recession, as I pointed out, which actually may not be a bad thing. Economy needs correction. And when that correction happens, that might actually help in lowering the inflation rate. A lot also depends on how successful countries are in alleviating the bottlenecks in supply chain, which it seems to be happening, fighting the pandemic, and then how long the Ukraine war will last. So that's where I believe the economy is heading. There's still a lot of unknown factors, and I'll open up to any questions you may have.
So at this time, if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself. There's also a feature, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little smiley face with reactions. You can raise your hand here. If you click that button, there's a little raise hand button. You're also welcome to type questions in the chat. Anybody?
No question?
Nobody wants to be first.
Yeah, Weena.
Yes.
Hey, Dr. Arshad, I just wanted to say thank you. I was very confused, like I told you, by the title, but it all makes sense now. So thank you. This was really insightful.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Dr. Arshad what he thinks, if he had to sort of prognosticate, what effect are the upcoming elections potentially going to have on the economy? That's one of the things that sometimes, in my view, doesn't get enough attention. You know, the potential impact of the, you know, what happens in Congress, what happens at the state level.
Yeah, that's
So
an excellent question, Peter. Well, it depends on whether the Democratic majority will enlarge. If it enlarges, there's a good possibility that Biden is going to become more aggressive in using the fiscal stimulus. The Inflation Reduction Act that I talked about, it was to me, I didn't think it would pass, but it did pass. But it was a curtailed version of the original plan that he had. So if that happens, and the thing about the economy is that there's always a lag. So you'll have the elections, and then if the Democrats have a larger majority, they will reconvene, come out with a plan, and then it has to go through successive passages in the two houses, and then in the two chambers, I should say, and then when if they're passed and signed into a bill, we are talking about 2 years at the very least. By that time, the economy will start to recover on its own. Now, if after the economy begins to recover, and if you still have slight inflation, and if they pass another massive fiscal stimulus, that may have a negative impact on inflation. So that may go up again. But recession, we may have a mild recession, as I pointed out in the first quarter, but it would be a normal correction in the economy.
is there a sort of anticipatory effect? I mean, might just people trying to figure out what's going to happen have
people form expectations, and economists look at how, for example, what consumers expectations are, what business expectations are. Right now, and there's a study that University of Michigan does, which actually calculates the inflationary expectation. Right now, that inflationary expectation has been coming down. That's a good sign, because wages are always based on what the inflationary expectations are. The cost of living in the Social Security is based on what the inflationary expectations are. So that's a good sign. But as far as the expectations in the job market is concerned, or the GDP is concerned, I don't think that has much of an impact on the real economy.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Dr. Arshad, it's Brenda. I have a question.
Hi, Brenda. Yeah, sure.
How is this, now that the bill, or my understanding is the bill that got sent, or that Biden did for the CBDCs with the cryptocurrency, how is that going to affect things? And is it supposed to be in December, or how do you see that affecting the economy?
Well, so far, the crypto currencies haven't had much of an impact. I mean, there's been hypes. You've heard the stories about how people have become millionaires by investing in, Dogecoin and so forth. we are still trying to figure out what the crypto market does to the economy. My belief is that even if we have a crypto economy, I mean, if you look at the El Salvador economy, they adopted cryptocurrency as their medium of exchange. But that has had a negative impact on their economy because Bitcoin has fallen down considerably. It fell below $20,000. But even if the crypto market picks up, now we need to regulate the crypto market. I have no doubt about that, because it's an arcane market. There's a lot of illegal money that gets transferred through it. So we need to regulate it. So given that we regulate it, I think that the Federal Reserve Bank and all the central banks will still be able to control the supply of money, because after all, I mean, if you buy cryptocurrency, you buy it through a crypto exchange, and when you buy it through crypto exchange, you have to transfer your dollars or your euros in the currency exchange. So they're all backed by real money. And the second thing is the thing that will make crypto important is its acceptability. It's gaining acceptability. But in my view, it'll take a long time before it would have any impact on the economy, especially the US economy. It's so large. I don't know if I've answered your question, Brenda, but we need regulation, and the bill basically aims at that. But how much of an impact it will have on the real economy, that's yet to be seen.
Thank you, sir.
Any other question? I don't know if Keith Tucker is here, but he might be able to answer the crypto question better than I can.
Not sure if you're on here, Keith. Maybe not. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Arshad. This was wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it. And yeah, if anybody wants to go back and again, watch any of the HU talks that you missed, we'll be posting these on YouTube, and we'll let you know on our website when those go up, probably sometime next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee.